What you are about to hear is 100% real. No fiction, no dramatization. Every name, every location, every detail, documented, verified, and drawn from actual case records. And yet, by the time this episode is over, part of you will still struggle to believe that any of this actually happened. Not in a movie, not in a novel, right here in real American communities, to real people. In broad daylight and behind locked doors and on quiet hiking trails where nobody ever thought anything like this could happen. Welcome to Crime Vault Files. If you are new here, hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like on this video, and share it with someone who loves true crime, because today we are unlocking 5 of the most disturbing true crime cases this country has ever produced. Let's open the vault. Case number 5, the photographer. He looked like someone who could change your life. His name was Reinaldo Rivera, born on September 13, 1963, in Madrid, Spain. Raised in Puerto Rico from the age of 7, a United States Navy veteran, a college graduate from the University of South Carolina, a married man with children, living quietly in North Augusta, South Carolina, and working as a tire inspector for Firestone. On paper, he was completely unremarkable. But beginning in the summer of 1999, something monstrous was moving through the communities straddling the Georgia and South Carolina border, and it wore the face of an ordinary man with an extraordinary offer. Rivera's approach never changed. He targeted young women, usually alone, usually going about the simplest errands of their daily lives, and he introduced himself as a modeling agent or a professional photographer. He talked about opportunity, about a better life. He was well-dressed and self-assured, and he made the offer feel real enough to say yes to. And one by one, young women got into his car and were never seen alive again. 17-year-old Melissa Dingus was first. On July 25, 1999, she vanished from North Augusta, South Carolina. Her skeletal remains were eventually recovered in a heavily wooded area near Harlem, Georgia, off Interstate 20, a location that only came to light because Rivera himself eventually led investigators there. 5 months later, on December 4th, 17-year-old Tiffany Cherise Wilson, a young mother from Jackson, South Carolina, left her home with her 2-month-old daughter Caitlin to have the baby's photograph taken with Santa Claus at the Winn-Dixie store in North Augusta. Witnesses in the parking lot watched Tiffany step into a mid-1980s white Ford that pulled up, stopped briefly, and sped away. 3 days later, baby Caitlin was found alone and crying in her mother's abandoned car at a Georgia welcome center just across the state line. Tiffany's body was recovered by investigators on December 30th in a heavily wooded area near Graniteville, South Carolina. Her hands had been bound behind her back. On June 29th of 2000, 17-year-old Tabitha Bosdell was walking to her telemarketing job in Augusta, Georgia, when Rivera pulled over and persuaded her to get into his car. He drove her to a secluded area, assaulted her, and strangled her, first with his arm, then with her own shirt. He then disposed of her body in the woods at an exit off Interstate 20 in Columbia County, Georgia, scattering her clothing along the roadside. Her skeletal remains were later identified solely through dental records. Sensing investigators were closing in, Rivera adapted. 2 months after Tabitha's murder, he followed 21-year-old Army Sergeant Marnie Glista from a grocery store and into her home on Fort Gordon in Augusta, where her husband was deployed to Kuwait. He bound her, assaulted her, and left her. She was discovered nearly 24 hours later and died 5 days after that. The moment Rivera's killing spree ended was on October 10th of 2000, in the parking lot of a Huddle House restaurant in North Augusta. He approached 18-year-old Chrysalie Barton with the same photography routine, followed her back to her home, assaulted her, and stabbed her repeatedly in the throat with a steak knife before leaving her for dead. Chrysalis survived. She described her attacker. When that description aired on local news, both a co-worker of Rivera's and his own sister-in-law called police and identified him by name. Officers tracked him to a motel in South Carolina. When cornered, Rivera attempted to take his own life and was rushed to the Medical College of Georgia. From custody, he confessed to all 4 murders in extraordinary detail, providing the locations of remains that had not yet been found, and describing each crime with a precision that left no room for any doubt. At his trial in Richmond County Superior Court in Augusta in January of 2004, Rivera pleaded guilty while claiming mental illness. The jury rejected it. Before sentencing, he stood and told the jurors directly that he was still fantasizing about his victims, that if he were ever released, he would kill again. He then asked them to sentence him to death. They did. Reinaldo Rivera remains on Georgia's death row, where he has been since that day. Case number 4, The Darkest Afternoon. Some crimes don't just destroy a family. They destroy an entire community's sense of safety. And some crimes are so precise in their evil, so methodical in their execution, that they seem almost impossible to fully comprehend even decades later. What happened on River Road in Donalsonville, Seminole County, Georgia, on the afternoon of May 14, 1973, is one of those crimes. The Alday family had been rooted in Seminole County for generations. They were farming people, deeply connected to their land, to their church, to each other. Ned Alday, the 62-year-old patriarch, had helped build Spring Creek Baptist Church with his own hands. His sons, Jerry, Jimmy, and Chester, worked the fields alongside him every day. His brother Aubrey farmed the same land, and Jerry's 26-year-old wife, Mary, worked in the nearby town of Donalsonville and came home to the family's mobile home on River Road each evening. Not one of them would make it through that afternoon. 400 miles north, 3 men had crawled out of a dormitory bathroom window at the Poplar Hill prison camp in Maryland on the night of May 5th, 9 days before the murders. Carl Isaacs, 19 years old, was already a seasoned criminal. His half-brother Wayne Coleman, 26, was the one who had pushed for the escape. George Dungy, 35, did whatever the others told him. After the breakout, they picked up Carl's 15-year-old brother Billy Isaacs from a girlfriend's house in Baltimore and pointed the car south. Coleman wanted to see the ocean. On May 10th in McConnellsburg, Pennsylvania, they kidnapped 19-year-old Richard Wayne Miller at gunpoint to steal his 1968 Chevrolet Super Sport. They murdered him and left his body near Flintstone, Maryland. His remains were not found for weeks. That was the car they were driving when they rolled through Seminole County on that bright May afternoon and spotted what looked like a gas pump on the edge of a rural property. It was actually an irrigation pump, completely useless to them. But the mobile home belonging to Jerry and Mary Alday on River Road appeared to be empty. Carl Isaacs and Wayne Coleman broke in and began searching for valuables. Dungy and Billy Isaacs kept watch outside. At approximately 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Ned and Jerry Alday drove up in a Jeep, returning from the fields. They were forced inside at gunpoint. Carl Isaacs took Jerry to the south bedroom and shot him in the head 4 times. Wayne Coleman took Ned to the north bedroom and shot him once, but Ned Alday was not finished. He stood up and fought back. It took 5 more bullets before Ned Alday went down. Minutes later, Jimmy Alday arrived on his tractor, knocked on the back door, and walked in. Carl Isaacs shot him dead in the living room. Then Mary Alday pulled up in her car. Carl Isaacs forced her inside. Then a pickup truck arrived carrying Chester Alday and Aubrey Alday. Billy and Carl met them outside at gunpoint and forced them into the home. Chester was killed in one bedroom. Aubrey was killed in another. Mary was the last. She was assaulted inside the mobile home, then driven to a heavily wooded area several miles away, where she was assaulted again by Dungy, and then shot to death. 6 members of one family, dead in a single afternoon on River Road. The 4 men loaded into Mary's car, abandoned it in Alabama, stole another vehicle, and were arrested 4 days later in Bluefield, West Virginia, following a grocery store robbery. George Dungy was still wearing Mary Alday's wristwatch when police took him into custody. It took not 1, but 2 full rounds of trials and 30 years to reach any finality. The original convictions were overturned in 1985 because pretrial publicity had irreparably tainted the jury pool in Seminole County. Coleman ultimately received a life sentence at Georgia State Prison in Reidsville. Dungy died in prison in 2006. Billy Isaacs, who testified for the state in both trials, was released in 1993 and died in Florida in 2009. Carl Isaacs was executed by lethal injection at the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson on May 6, 2003, 30 years after the murders. He made no final statement. He expressed no remorse. He went to his death exactly as he had lived, without apology. Case number 3, The Man on the Trail. On New Year's Day of 2008, 24-year-old Meredith Hope Emerson laced up her boots, leashed her black Labrador retriever Ella, and headed out to hike the Freeman Trail on Blood Mountain in Vogel State Park in the mountains of northern Georgia. She was a University of Georgia graduate, a trained martial artist, and an experienced hiker who knew these mountains well. She was exactly the kind of person who felt completely safe out there. She was not alone on that trail. Behind her walked a man. Older, grizzled, high-end hiking gear, a police-style baton and a bayonet knife on his belt, a golden retriever of his own padding along at his side. His name was Gary Michael Hilton, born in 1946, a drifter who had spent decades moving through the national forests of Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina like a ghost. He had no fixed address. He lived out of a battered green 2001 Chevrolet Astro van. He knew every trail. He was well-spoken and could hold a conversation. He looked like he belonged out there. He had already been killing for months. On October 21st of 2007, 80-year-old John Bryant and his 84-year-old wife Irene Bryant, a retired couple and avid hikers from North Carolina, set out into the Pisgah National Forest in Transylvania County, North Carolina, and did not return. Their vehicle sat at the trailhead for days before family raised the alarm. On November 10th, search parties found Irene's bludgeoned body on a leaf-covered path in the forest. A bank card belonging to the couple had been used at an ATM in Ducktown, Tennessee, to withdraw $300, the footage showing only a hooded figure keeping his face away from the camera. John Bryant's skull was not recovered until 4 months later, found by a hunter in the Nantahala National Forest. Hilton was not finished. On December 3rd of 2007, 46-year-old Cheryl Hodges Dunlap, a nurse at Florida State University's Student Health Center and a Sunday school teacher at her church in Tallahassee, Florida, failed to appear for her class. Her family reported her missing the following day when her white Toyota Camry was found abandoned north of the county line. A search party of 180 people combed the surrounding forest. On December 16th, a hunter named Ronnie Rentz and his dogs found her decapitated, decomposing body in the Apalachicola National Forest in the Florida Panhandle. Hilton had used her ATM card 5 times in Tallahassee, withdrawing $700 from her account. Investigators were still not connecting the cases. Then came Meredith. By January 3rd of 2008, Meredith Emerson's 1995 Chevrolet Cavalier was still parked at the Byron Herbert Reese trailhead at Blood Mountain. Investigators began canvassing. Witnesses identified the older man seen following Meredith on the spur trail connecting the Appalachian Trail to the parking lot, and that man was identified as Gary Hilton, a local drifter known to frequent those same trails with his dog Dandy. On January 4th, a witness at a Chevron gas station near Vogel State Park called police and said the man they were looking for was vacuuming out his green van. Officers arrived and stopped Hilton before he could bleach the interior. Blood evidence inside the van matched Meredith's DNA. Her clothing, wallet, driver's license, and University of Georgia YD card were recovered from a dumpster near a Quick Trip parking lot in Cumming, Georgia. The same day, Ella was found alive and wandering the parking lot of a Kroger grocery store in Cumming. Prosecutors offered Hilton a deal, lead them to Meredith, and the death penalty comes off the table. Hilton added one personal condition, that his dog Dandy be safely rehomed. Both sides agreed. Hilton led investigators deep into the Dawson Forest Management Area in Dawson County, Georgia, over an hour from Blood Mountain, and walked them directly to Meredith's body. He later described what had happened over the 4 days he had held her captive. She had fought him. She had refused to give him her correct PIN number. He said he had repeatedly struck her with a tire iron until she could fight no longer. The autopsy confirmed she died of blunt force trauma to the head. Gary Hilton received life in Georgia for Meredith's murder. In 2011, a Florida jury convicted him of Cheryl Dunlap's murder in Leon County and sentenced him to death. In 2012, he pleaded guilty to the murders of John and Irene Bryant in the Pisgah National Forest. Gary Michael Hilton, now 79 years old, sits on death row at Florida's Union Correctional Institution in Rayford, Florida. He has never fully accounted for what else may still be out there in those woods. Case number 2, 8 Months of Terror. The Winton neighborhood of Columbus, Georgia, carries itself with old money grace, tree-lined streets, stately historic homes, and a deep settled sense of order on the banks of the Chattahoochee River in Muscogee County. In September of 1977, something broke all of that wide open. Over the next 8 months, 7 women were raped and murdered inside their own homes in and around Winton. Each one was strangled with a ligature made from her own stockings or pantyhose. Each one was found covered in her own bed. The press called him the Stocking Strangler. Fear spread through the community of Columbus like wildfire. Residents tore out their mature azalea hedges to eliminate hiding spots. Women stopped walking the streets after dark. Soldiers from nearby Fort Benning were deployed to patrol the neighborhood. And still, the murders continued. The first confirmed murder was on September 16, 1977. 60-year-old Mary Ferna Jackson, an employee of the Columbus Health Department, found in her Winton home after failing to report for work. 9 days later, 71-year-old Jean Dimmenstein was killed in the same fashion in her Winton home. On October 21st, 89-year-old Florence Schiebel, nearly blind and able to walk only with the aid of a walker, was raped, beaten, and strangled in her apartment. 4 days after that, 69-year-old Martha Thurmond was murdered. On December 28th, 74-year-old Kathleen Woodruff became his 5th victim. On February 12, 1978, he attacked 60-year-old Ruth Schwab, but she triggered a bedside alarm and he fled. He walked exactly 2 blocks and killed 78-year-old Mildred Borum instead. His final victim, 61-year-old Janet Kofer, who had attended choir practice at Winton Methodist Church that same evening, was found in her bed on April 19th of 1978, a pillow placed over her face. Then the murders stopped, and for 6 full years, nobody was charged. The break came in 1984 through a .22 caliber Ruger pistol stolen during a Winton burglary in October of 1977. A phone inquiry about that stolen gun led then Sergeant Mike Sellers of the Columbus Police Department to trace it carefully through relatives across state lines, through Michigan, through Gary, Indiana, through Phoenix City, Alabama, until the trail led to a man who had recently escaped from prison in South Carolina and quietly slipped back into Columbus. His name was Carlton Michael Gary, born in Columbus on September 24, 1950, raised in grinding poverty, arrested since his teens for robbery, assault, and arson. Not a stranger, not an outsider. A man this city had known all along. When Sellers brought him in, Gary admitted to the burglaries but claimed an accomplice named Malvin had committed the actual murders. Then, in what appeared to be an attempt to control the narrative, he offered to take investigators through the Winton neighborhood himself in the dead of night and walk them through each crime scene personally. In the early morning hours of May 3, 1984, handcuffed and shackled in the back seat of Sergeant Sellers' car, Carlton Gary directed law enforcement slowly through the dark and silent streets of Winton, house by house, recounting the details of the crimes at each address. Sellers later said it was one of the most profoundly unsettling experiences of his entire career. Gary's fingerprints were found at 4 of the crime scenes. A survivor, Gertrude Miller, identified him in court. He was indicted in Muscogee County Superior Court and convicted of 3 counts of murder in August of 1986 and sentenced to death. But the case has never been clean. British investigative journalist David Rose spent years examining the conviction and documented serious irregularities. Gary's supposed confession was unsigned, undated, and reconstructed entirely from a detective's memory days after the interview had taken place. DNA testing conducted decades later linked Gary to one victim, but not to others. In the case of Gertrude Miller, the very woman who had identified Gary in court as her attacker, DNA evidence pointed to an entirely different man. Shoe prints at one scene indicated a size 10 foot. Carlton Gary wore a size 13.5. Evidence that should have been disclosed to the defense was never shared. An execution date was set for December 16, 2009. Hours before it was to be carried out, the Georgia Supreme Court intervened, halting the execution and ordering a new hearing on the DNA evidence. The case ground through the courts for 8 more years. On March 15, 2018, exactly 35 years to the day after his escape from prison, Carlton Michael Gary was executed by lethal injection at Georgia's Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson at 10:33 in the evening. He said nothing. He did not look at the victims' families watching from behind the glass. He went to his death maintaining, as he had for over 30 years, that he was not the Stocking Strangler. Whether that was the truth has never been fully settled. Case number 1. The Lake Oconee Mystery. Some crimes are brazen, loud, chaotic. And then there are crimes like this one, quiet, surgical, and so deliberately calculated that even a decade of exhaustive investigation has produced almost nothing. Russell Joseph Dermond was 88 years old, a native of Hackensack, New Jersey, a United States Navy veteran of World War II, and a man who had built his life in Georgia by owning and operating several Hardee's restaurant locations in the Atlanta area before retiring in 1994. He had married Shirley Wilcox Dermond on December 15, 1950. They had been together for 68 years, had 4 children and 9 grandchildren, and lived in a 3,300-square-foot home on Carolyn Drive inside Reynolds Plantation, a gated lakefront community on the shores of Lake Oconee in Putnam County, Georgia, approximately 80 miles southeast of Atlanta. Their neighbors waved from driveways. Everyone knew everyone's car. It was exactly the kind of place you go to feel safe in your final years. On May 1st, 2014, Russell was captured on surveillance cameras inside a Publix grocery store in Eatonton, Georgia, running his usual errands. That evening, he and Shirley spoke with their son Brad on the phone. That was the last confirmed contact with either of them. The following weekend, the Dermonds were expected at a neighbor's Kentucky Derby party. When they didn't appear and their phones went unanswered, a neighbor drove to Carolyn Drive on May 6th and found the front door unlocked. The house was completely silent, and in the two-car garage, lying on the floor between the couple's two parked vehicles, was the decapitated body of Russell Dermond. There was far less blood than a wound of that nature would typically produce, because towels had been carefully placed around the body to contain it. Gunshot residue was found on Russell's shirt collar, suggesting he had been shot in the head first and then decapitated specifically to remove the bullet and eliminate the ballistic evidence. This was not savagery. This was forensic planning. Shirley was nowhere in the house. Police initially feared she had been taken. They theorized the killers had arrived by boat, approaching from Lake Oconee on the unguarded water side of the property, where there was no gate to pass through. 10 days later, on May 16th, two fishermen spotted something floating in Lake Oconee approximately 5 miles from the Dermond home. It was Shirley. She had been beaten to death. The autopsy indicated the wounds were deep and severe, consistent with a blunt instrument. Her body had been weighted down with 2 large cinder blocks, but decomposition had made her buoyant, and she rose to the surface, something her killers had not accounted for. And here is the detail that has haunted every investigator who has ever worked this case. Nothing was taken. Not Shirley's purse, not the couple's cell phones, left in plain view on a surface. Not money, not jewelry, not a single item of value anywhere in that home. Police believe multiple perpetrators were involved and that they came to Carolyn Drive intending to obtain money, but why Russell and Shirley Dermond, in their late 80s, in their gated lakefront home, were targeted with this level of coordinated, calculating violence has never been explained. Hundreds of interviews were conducted by the Putnam County Sheriff's Office and the FBI. No meaningful suspect has ever been publicly identified. In May of 2024, a full decade after the murders, FBI Special Agent Andy Smith and Putnam County Sheriff Howard Sills announced that DNA found on Russell's shirt did not belong to either him or Shirley. That sample was sent to a private forensic laboratory for further testing. The reward for information in the case has since been raised to $25,000. Russell's head has never been found, and whoever walked into that quiet lakefront home on Carolyn Drive and did what they did to two people who had built 68 years of life together, they have never faced a single consequence. Those were 5 real cases, 5 sets of real victims, 5 stories so disturbing that even knowing every verified fact, part of your mind still resists believing they actually happened. But they did. Every single one. If this episode stayed with you, and we believe it will, hit that like button right now, share this video with someone who loves true crime, and subscribe to Crime Vault Files so you are here when we open the next case. We read every comment you leave us. Every like, every share, and every subscriber keeps this vault open and keeps these stories from ever being forgotten. Until the next case, stay curious, stay sharp, and stay safe out there.